I love you. There are few phrases as powerful as this. 3 words capable of creating bonds, tear down defenses, open emotional doors that have remained closed for years. But what if behind this statement, was there no feeling? And if what you heard was love actually calculation? The truth is disturbing. Some of the coldest predators don't start with threats. They start with affection. They don't break down doors. They come in being exactly what you always dreamed of. Kind regards. Intense. Gifts. They study your fears, your traumas, your needs, and they offer exactly what you needed. Listen. Not because they feel it, but because they know. The conflict is not in visible violence. It's in the subtlety. It's in the look that seems deep too much, in connection too fast, in the "I've never felt this way about anyone" said too soon. Psychopaths don't love the way we understand love. They imitate, reproduce, gestures, copy reactions. They decorate emotional expressions like an actor rehearsing a paper. The mask is perfect, and that's what makes it dangerous. Today you will understand how the mind of someone who says, "I love you," without feeling it works absolutely nothing. Let's explore the mechanism of calculated seduction, the cycle of emotional manipulation, and why so many victims only realize the truth when are already deeply involved. Because the scariest thing is not the explicit aggression. It is the silent absence of empathy. If you've ever felt like someone seemed too normal, maybe this video will help you understand why. Why? Psychopathy is not synonymous with explosive violence. It often manifests itself in intimate, silent environments within seemingly perfect relationships. Oh, social predators don't need to shout. He watches, learn, adjust. He understands like you. It works before you even realize how it works. And when the mask starts to slip, confusion has already taken over your mind. You begin to doubt your own perception. Am I exaggerating? Is the problem me? This is the invisible gear of psychological control. But there is a pattern. It always exists. And in the next few minutes you will see signs that may have passed unnoticed in their own history. Because when someone incapable of empathy says, "I love you," what does he really mean? What if the love you believed you lived was never more than a strategy? At first everything seems too intense to be dangerous. He responds quickly. He remembers details that no one else noticed. He says he never met someone like you. In just a few days, it creates a feeling of deep connection, almost spiritual. It seems like destiny. It seems rare. It looks unique. But intensity is not synonymous with love. Sometimes it's strategy. Psychopaths learn early to observe. They study facial expressions, tones of voice, behavior patterns. Unlike most people who feel empathy from automatically, the psychopath needs to simulate. He does not experience the emotional bond of same way. What it does is analyze what works, test, adjust, perfect. This is the social mask, a construction carefully crafted to appear human, sensitive, passionate. He asks deep questions early on. Want to know about your childhood, your frustrations, your fears, not because you want to welcome, but because it is collecting data. Each revealed insecurity becomes a future tool of control. The process usually follows an invisible script. First comes idealization. You are perfect, special, different from everyone else. He says he feels finally understood, that you found someone who completes you. This phase is intoxicating. Your brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, creates addiction emotional. You feel seen, chosen. But there is a subtle detail. Everything happens too quickly. Healthy relationships build intimacy over time. Psychopaths speed up. They create emotional urgency. They make premature plans. They talk about the future in the first weeks. This speed prevents rational analysis. When you realize it, it's already involved. And then small signs begin. Subtle comments that lower your self-esteem. Jokes that seem innocent but leave a strange discomfort. Small contradictions in the stories told. moments, in which the gaze seems empty for a second longer than it should. The fundamental difference is in empathy. Neuroscience studies show that individuals with psychopathic traits present reduced activity in brain areas linked to emotional processing and guilt. This means that while you feel pain when imagining hurting someone, it can simulate repentance without experiencing any internal discomfort. He learns what love should look like, but don't feel it. And when the mask works, he receives something valuable: power. The power to influence your mood. The power to decide when to offer affection and when withdraw attention. The power to create dependence. This cycle of recompensation and active withdrawal in victim's brain, the same mechanism observed in behavioral addictions. You start looking for that intense version from the beginning again, and that's exactly what he wants. If something here starts to make sense to you, stick with it until the end. What's next? It can change the way you observe people, because the perfect mask phase doesn't last forever. No actor can sustain a role 24 hours a day without letting go of small fragments of the essence itself. And when these fragments appear, they don't come as explosions, they come as cracks. A cold silence after an argument, an absence of comfort when you cry, a strange inability to take responsibility. You start to feel like something is wrong, but you can't name it. He even says, I love, still makes promises. He still swears he's by your side. So why does the feeling of emptiness grow? Why does the affection seem rehearsed? And most importantly, what happens when the mask finally starts to fall? When the mask starts to fail, the real mechanism comes into play. What was once constant intensity turns into calculated instability. The affection becomes silence. Presence becomes absence. And the I love you begins to emerge exactly after of moments of tension. It's no coincidence. It's a cycle. In behavioral psychology, there is a classic pattern called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle used in gambling. You never know when the reward will come. Sometimes it comes, sometimes not. This unpredictability drastically increases attachment. O-brain starts desperately looking for the next good moment. This is where the psychopath becomes most dangerous. After the idealization phase, subtle devaluation begins. He criticizes your way, questions your choices, distorts past conversations. If you react, it reverses the narrative, says you're exaggerating, which is too sensitive. What are you imagining things? This process has a name: gaslighting. It is a form of psychological manipulation where the victim begins to doubt themselves. Perception of reality. Small events are rewritten, promises denied, facts changed. And as he still intersperses moments of affection, you cling to the hope of may that affectionate version return. But that version wasn't real. It was a tool. From a neurological point of view, the victim's brain begins to live in a state of alert. Limbic system, responsible for emotions, becomes hyperactivated. Cortisol increases. Anxiety grows. And paradoxically, this intensifies the trauma bond. You try, fix the relationship, believing that if you act in the right way, everything will go back to normal. Start. Meanwhile, he watches. Psychopaths have a high capacity for behavioral reading. They notice when you're about to walk away. And it is at this moment that love reappears with full force. Long messages, profound statements, promises of change. It is the return to idealization, but temporary. Soon after, the coldness returns, because the goal was never to build intimacy. It was keeping control. I love you, in this context, works as an emotional anchor. He knows that phrase activates affective memories, future expectations, fantasies of stability. He uses words as triggers, not because you feel it, but because they work. The essential difference between an ordinary person and a psychopath lies in the experience of guilt. When an emotionally healthy person realizes that they have hurt the one they love, there is real discomfort, remorse, genuine repair attempt. In psychopaths, reparation is strategic. If apologizing increases the chances of maintaining dominance, he does. If you demonstrate fragility generates empathy, he demonstrates. But internally, there is not the same moral conflict. There is calculation. And then comes the quietest phase of the cycle, discarding. It may not be immediate physical abandonment. Sometimes it's an emotional withdrawal, progressive. He begins to seek new sources of validation, new people to test. You feel like you're wasting space, but when you question it, he accuses you of paranoia. It's a psychological maze. You try to recover the beginning. He's already bored. Psychopaths have high levels of stimulation seeking. They need something new, of challenge. When control is already consolidated, the emotion decreases. And without emotion, there is interest. The most devastating thing is that while you suffer trying to understand what you did wrong, you can simply move on to the next target without any emotional weight. Because there was never love. There was possession. There was excitement. There was a game. But before you believe that everything ends here, there is something even more disturbing. Not all psychopaths are quick to dismiss. Some prefer to keep the victim imprisoned for years. What happens when control is not just emotional, but structural? How to identify the exact moment when manipulation stops being subtle and becomes an invisible prison? And why, despite noticing clear signs, so many people continue to saying to you same ones that is still love? There is a specific moment when something changes. It's not an explosion. It's not a scandal. It's a feeling. You talk about something that hurt you, and he listens with his face still, the attentive eyes, but empty. He says the right words. I understand. I'm sorry. This won't happen again. But there is no emotion behind it. It's like watching someone recite a script. This is the invisible coldness. Most people react emotionally to the suffering of those they love. The body changes. The voice wavers. There is genuine discomfort. In the psychopath, discomfort is absent. He cognitively understands that he should demonstrate something, then demonstrate. But it is execution, not feeling. Forensic psychology research shows that individuals high in psychopathic traits present preserved cognitive empathy. That is, they understand what the other feels, but reduced affective empathy. They know how to describe pain. They just don't try it together. And this creates a silent abyss within the relationship. You start to feel like you're alone even though you're accompanied. In conflicts, he rarely takes full responsibility, can admit small mistakes, but there is always a greater justification. There is always an explanation that puts it as victim of circumstances. Little by little, the narrative reorganizes itself. The problem is not what he did. It's how you reacted. And then the self-criticism begins. Maybe I'm being too picky. Maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. Maybe he have had a difficult day. This constant maybe is corrosive. Coldness also appears in emotional inconsistency. One day he is intense, present, almost dependent. In the other, distant, indifferent, as if nothing mattered. This oscillation is not ordinary emotional instability. It is strategic proximity regulation. He approaches when he perceives a risk of loss. He moves away when he feels he already has control. Most disturbing is the absence of guilt after clearly painful episodes. Arguments that end with you crying and him sleeping peacefully for minutes later. Decisions that hurt you deeply, and him acting like they were details insignificant. As you mentally relive every word said, he continues normally. This discrepancy begins to generate a specific type of wear and tear, psychological fatigue. You try to explain it in different ways. Try to be more calm, more logic, more emotion. But it seems like nothing really gets through. He listens, analyze, respond, but doesn't connect. And without connection, love starts to feel one-sided. Some victims describe the sensation as loving a mirror. Everything seems real surface, but there is no depth behind the reflection. It replicates your enthusiasm, reproduces your affection. It even reproduces your pain, but only when it suits. There is also a subtle detail, the discreet pleasure in control, an almost imperceptible smile when you show insecurity, a satisfied look when he realizes that you reorganized his routine to adapt to it. Emotional control generates stimulation. For many people, intimacy creates security. For the psychopath, control generates excitement. And then the most difficult question arises. If he never felt the way you feel, what exactly was he living? Was it affection? Was it desire? Was it just a game? When you begin to see this coldness, something inside you awakens. But along with this awakening comes fear. Fear of being right. Fear of having invested time, energy, and love in someone who may have never been able to reciprocate. Because admitting this means accepting that "I love you" may have just been a tool. But there is an even more disturbing point. The moment you realize, and he realizes you noticed, what happens when the mask has fallen and control begins to slip? And how far can someone without empathy go to avoid losing control? The most dangerous moment is not when you find out. That's when he realizes you're figuring it out. Until then, the game was comfortable. You doubted yourself. He drove the narrative. But now something has changed. You started asking more direct questions. He began to observe standards. He began to notice that "I love you" always appears after behavior's cold. And that changes the balance of power. When control begins to slip, the psychopath can react in two ways: intensifying the charm or intensifying the manipulation. Some return to the idealized version with almost overwhelming force. Unexpected flowers, emotional statements, promises of therapy, change, transformation. He creates the feeling that you finally understood everything, that you were right, that he will get better. It is a last attempt to reestablish the traumatic bond. Others choose the opposite route: psychological intimidation. Not necessarily screams or explicit violence, but subtle threats, comments that generate fear. Phrases such as, "No one will believe you," "You are being paranoid," "If you leave, you will regret it, give." The objective is simple: restore the domain. At this point, the mask is already cracked. And that is precisely why the behavior may become more unpredictable. Psychopaths have low frustration tolerance when they lose control. The feeling of superiority begins to be threatened. And when the ego is threatened, the risk increases. You begin to notice something that previously seemed impossible: the total absence of real vulnerability. He may cry, you can beg, you can say you are suffering, but there is an almost imperceptible difference. Emotions are not connected to context. They arise as a performance, not as a consequence. It is at this stage that many victims report painful clarity: the realization that they were in love with a version that never existed. What hurts is not just the manipulation. It is the breaking of the internal narrative. Did you believe that I was building something real? Planned the future? Shared secrets? Delivered weaknesses? And for him, this was strategic material. Social predators don't just feed on physical control. They feed on emotional control, the ability to change your mood, to influence your self-esteem, from decide when you feel loved and when you feel disposable. This generates an almost addictive feeling of power. But here's the crux. When you break the cycle, the game loses its fun. Without an intense emotional reaction, without dependence, without fear, he loses stimulation. Oh. Control is only pleasurable when there is emotional resistance on the other side. When you begins to move away internally, something changes in the dynamics. And that's why breaking away from a psychopathic profile is rarely simple. He may try future rapprochements. It may appear months later with messages nostalgic. You can test whether there is still emotional access, not because you miss it, but because you want to confirm whether you still have influence. The question that remains is an uncomfortable one. If he never loved, why did it feel so real? How can someone simulate intimacy so accurately? And even more disturbing, if you hadn't started questioning, how far could it have gone? There comes a time when the question stops being, why did he do that? And it becomes, what did he really feel? The answer is uncomfortable. Love involves empathy. It involves the ability to be affected by the pain of others. Involves renunciation, emotional responsibility, guilt when someone important is hurt. Love true creates bond, creates spontaneous care, creates internal limit. In psychopathy, this limit does not exist in the same way. What may exist is utilitarian attachment, desire, fascination, excitement for control, but no love in the deepest sense of the word. I love you may have been said hundreds of times, and yet not have carried the emotional weight that you felt when listening to it. This doesn't mean you imagined it all. It means you felt alone. This is the hardest part to accept. Many victims spend years trying to reinterpret the story, looking for moments that prove that something was real, remembering intense statements, grand gestures. But intensity is not depth. Intensity can be a tool. The psychopath doesn't love people. He loves what people provide: admiration, submission, validation, emotional reaction. When this decreases, interest decreases. And then an even more disturbing reflection arises. How many relationships apparently normal people work more out of emotional dependence than out of genuine love? Perhaps the most disturbing thing is not discovering that he never loved. Maybe it's realizing how much you ignored your own intuition. That strange feeling at the beginning, that little inconsistency, that empty look after an argument. Your body realized it before your mind accepted it. The mind rationalizes. Instinct alerts. If this content made you think differently about the human mind, sign up. Here we explore what almost no one wants to see. Because understanding psychopathy is not just identifying the other. It's strengthening your perception. It's learning that healthy love doesn't speed up too much, doesn't confuse too much, doesn't hurt repeatedly, and then blames you for the pain. Love is not strategy. Love is not a game. Love is not manipulation. And if someone says, "I love you," while controlling you, it diminishes you and makes you doubt yourself. Reality. Maybe it was never love. Maybe it was just a mask. And the final question is not about him. It's about you. Now that you know how the mask works, would you recognize the signs before "Here I love you" again? Or is there still something in us that prefers to believe in illusion?